I made a solemn promise at the election to return economic and fiscal stability to the economy, and that is anchored around the fiscal rules that say that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts and that we'll get debt down as a share of GDP. Subject to that, invest in those things to help grow our economy. And it's been those commitments to economic and fiscal stability that have enabled 5 cuts in interest rates.
Before we dive into what might be the most consequential budget announcement of the decade, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be notified when this all comes crashing down in just 10 weeks' time. Right? Let's get into it. Rachel Reeves has just lit the fuse on what could be the most brutal tax raid in modern British history. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. We're talking about a £50 billion black hole, harsh choices, and a chancellor who's essentially told the British public to brace for impact. The question isn't whether taxes are going up anymore. The question is how much pain are we all about to endure, and who's going to bear the brunt of it? Because make no mistake, when Reeves delivers a pre-Christmas budget on November the 26th, someone's going to be left holding a very expensive bill. Let me paint you the picture. At Labour's annual conference in Liverpool, Reeves stood before party faithful and delivered what can only be described as a masterclass in political forewarning. She spoke of harsh global headwinds. She mentioned harder choices on taxes and spending. She referenced long-term damage to the country that becoming ever clearer. This is diplomatic speak, isn't it? This is a chancellor preparing the ground for what's coming, softening the blow before the hammer falls. And the hammer will fall. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research has estimated the shortfall could reach £50 billion. That's not a typo. £50 billion. To put that in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the entire education budget for England. So where exactly is that money going to come from? Well, Reeves has promised not to take risks with Britain's economic stability, which sounds reassuring until you realize that tax hikes and spending cuts are the only tools left in her box. Now here's where it gets particularly interesting, and by interesting I mean deeply concerning for anyone who pays taxes in this country. When pressed on VAT, Reeves couldn't categorically rule out hiking it. In fact, Darren Jones, the Prime Minister's Chief Secretary to the Treasury, said something rather remarkable. He told Sky News that Labour's manifesto promises not to increase income tax, national insurance, or VAT only stood today because decisions haven't been taken ahead of the budget. Let that sink in for a moment. Today, not tomorrow, not next month. Today. This is the kind of linguistic gymnastics that would make Orwell proud. It's also the kind of statement that should have every working person in pension in Britain sitting up and paying very close attention. Because if the manifesto only stands today, what exactly happens in 10 weeks when that budget is delivered? The speculation has been nothing short of feverish. Pensioners paying national insurance. Pension raids that have expats scrambling to move their funds out of the UK entirely. Income tax thresholds frozen at £50,270. Calls for Rachel Reeves to hike what some are describing as the UK's biggest tax in a huge budget gamble that may, and I quote, finish it politically. The anxiety is palpable. You can see it in the hundreds of comments on every article about this topic. 789 comments on pensioners potentially paying national insurance. 892 comments on whether Reeves sees older generations as a golden goose to be plucked. These aren't just numbers. These are people who are genuinely worried about their financial futures, about whether the pension they spent decades building will be worth the paper it's written on. And then we have the political theatre of it all. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride has accused Labour of already raising taxes by £40 billion per year, including a £25 billion tax on jobs, and now Labour won't rule out coming back for more. His assessment is rather stark. Under Labour, nothing is safe. Not your job, not your savings, not your pension. That's quite the indictment, isn't it? But is it fair? Well, when you've got a £50 billion black hole and a chancellor who's openly admitting that harder choices are coming, it's difficult to argue that fears of further tax raids are entirely unfounded. The Taxpayers Alliance hasn't held back either. Chief Executive John O'Connell described Reeves' conference speech as hollow, hopelessly out of touch, and ignorant of the damage her policies are causing for small businesses, family farmers, and ordinary taxpayers. He claims the economy is stuck in a doom loop, with Reeves punishing work, investment, and aspiration while pouring money into what he calls a bloated state that delivers less and less. Strong words, but they reflect a genuine frustration that's brewing not just within conservative circles but among ordinary Britons who are trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet when the tax man comes knocking again. What's particularly fascinating about this entire saga is the internal Labour dynamics. With Labour trailing Reform UK in some polls, Keir Starmer's leadership is being questioned. Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester mayor, has apparently been urged by some MPs to challenge him. Burnham himself has suggested the UK needs to get beyond being in hock to the bond markets and has set out plans for billions more in borrowing. Reeves, in what can only be described as a thinly veiled swipe at Burnham's economic approach, warned of the dangers of unrestrained borrowing. She said there are still those who peddle the idea that we could just abandon economic responsibility and cast off any constraints on spending, and they are dangerously wrong. So not only is Reeves preparing to potentially wallop the British public with massive tax hikes, she's also battling voices within her own party who think she should be borrowing even more. It's a precarious position for any chancellor to be in. But let's talk about what Reeves is actually promising to deliver with all this fiscal pain. A youth guarantee offering paid work to young people who spent 18 months not in employment, education, or training. Northern powerhouse rail linking towns and cities across northern England. A library in every English primary school. These are worthy goals, certainly, but are they worth the potential tax burden that's about to be placed on working people and pensioners? And then there's this rather eyebrow-raising announcement about securing an ambitious agreement on youth mobility with the European Union to help secure maximum economic and cultural opportunities. For a party that fought the last election on a platform that was notably cautious about closer EU ties, this feels like quite the pivot, doesn't it? The Institute of Economic Affairs isn't buying the growth narrative either. Tom Clufferty, the executive director, said that for all the positive words about growth, there's very little substance that gives cause for optimism. That's damning, particularly when growth is supposed to be Labour's #1 priority. If the experts who study economic policy for a living can't find reason for optimism in Reeves' plans, what chance do the rest of us have? And we can't ignore the political attacks woven throughout all of this. Reeves used large chunks of her Liverpool speech to take jabs at Nigel Farage, accusing him of being in bed with Vladimir Putin and calling him the single greatest threat to the livelihoods of Britons. Now, whether you agree with that assessment or not, it's telling that in a speech that should have been focused on reassuring the British public about the economy, Reeves felt compelled to spend significant time attacking the leader of Reform UK. It suggests a level of political anxiety about where the electorate's sympathies might lie when those tax hikes start hitting home. So where does this leave us? In 10 weeks, Rachel Reeves will stand up in Parliament and deliver a budget that could fundamentally reshape the British tax landscape. The signs are all pointing towards significant increases. VAT might go up. National insurance could be extended to pensioners. Pension relief might be slashed. Income tax thresholds will likely remain frozen, dragging more people into higher tax brackets through fiscal drag. Small businesses and farmers are bracing for impact. Expats are already making contingency plans to move their wealth offshore. And all the while, the Chancellor insists this is about stability, about making responsible choices, about taking the country forward. But for millions of Britons, it's starting to feel less like moving forward and more like being backed into a corner with no way out. The fundamental tension here is between Labour's ambitious spending plans and the fiscal reality they've inherited. Reeves argues a previous government left the public finances in tatters. The Conservatives argue Labour is using that as an excuse to pursue an ideological agenda of higher taxes and bigger government. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between. But regardless of where you place the blame, the consequences are going to be felt by real people with real mortgages, real pension pots, and real concerns about their financial futures. What's clear is that the social contract between the British government and its taxpayers is under immense strain. People expect services. They expect infrastructure investment. They expect the NHS to function, schools to be properly resourced, and transport links to be reliable. But they also expect not to be taxed into oblivion. Balancing those expectations with a £50 billion shortfall is a Herculean task, and there's no indication yet that Reeves has found a politically palatable way to square that circle. The next 10 weeks are going to be absolutely crucial. We'll see more leaks, more speculation, more trial balloons floated to gauge public reaction. Reeves will be hoping that by preparing the ground now, by warning of harsh choices and global headwinds, she can soften the blow when the actual numbers are revealed. But British voters have a long memory, particularly when it comes to broken manifesto promises and unexpected tax rises. Ask Nick Clegg about tuition fees if you need a reminder of how that tends to play out politically. So keep your eyes on this space. Keep watching this channel. Because when November the 26th rolls around and Rachel Reeves opens that red box, the ramifications are going to echo through British politics for years to come. This isn't just another budget. This is a defining moment for Labour's economic credibility, for Keir Starmer's leadership, and for the financial well-being of millions of British households. The fuse has been lit. Now we wait to see how big the explosion will be. If you want to stay ahead of every twist and turn in this unfolding saga, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that notification bell, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens